This video is going to be about the injectors on this direct injected engine. I believe the most important thing to know is to find out using just the live data if the injectors are wrong. Right under the fuel rails we've got the injectors. Alright, let's zoom in. From this point I already begin to drive the car. The car was moving, the engine was under a load. But first I want to show you an interesting live data which is introduced by Mercedes, I think. Engine fuel rate, and it looks like this value means how much fuel the engine is using, because on a regular car you need to basically find out yourself what is the engine fuel rate by looking at the other live data feeds. So here we get the information right on our screens. We always want to look for the load value because this is more important than the engine RPM, because the engine RPM can increase but the fuel rate will not increase because there is nothing on the engine, there is not load, and therefore if there is no load there is no request for more fuel. And we've got here the purple line for the fuel rate, which follows up almost proportional with the load value. And you can see here how the engine RPM just slowly goes down, but the load is already down long time ago. So now let's say that we've got some leaky injectors. What we're gonna see here is that the engine fuel rate will maybe surpass the green line, which is the load value. So in that way we know that the engine is consuming a lot more fuel. And here we can see with the green, the load value goes up. The long-term fuel trim decreases dramatically from 16 to 4.2. And this usually indicates in many situations, or most of the situations, a vacuum leak. So basically the computer is not adding any more fuel because that extra air is not coming in, since the intake manifold will have less vacuum, and therefore less vacuum will mean less air will enter unmeasured. However, let's say that we are working on an older car. How are we gonna see from the live data if we have a problem with the injectors? Again, we have to use the fuel trims because these are basically the interpretation of the oxygen sensors, and the oxygen sensors are going to be the last ones which will read the information of the air, basically the properties of the air once it goes out of the exhaust. So these are going to be the feedback not only of the throttle body, the map sensor, but also the feedback of the injectors. So considering that we have the spark plugs in good condition, everything works fine, we don't have vacuum leaks, then we can focus on the injectors because these are going to be the most hidden ones. On the live data we're going to see a slightly increasing positive number in the fuel trim if the injector is clogged or is not spraying enough fuel because of a high pressure fuel pump problem. And we're gonna see a negative fuel trim either on the short term or long term. So if the long term fuel trim will decrease and go negative, then we know the computer is trying to cut off the fuel because the oxygen sensor is detecting too much gasoline into the exhaust gases, and obviously that can be caused by a leaky injector. This is probably the most common problem of the injectors. They are leaking too much fuel, but it can also happen that they are clogged up, so both situations are plausible. So long story short, these are the two main problems that can happen on injector itself, disregarding the connections, disregarding the fuel pressure. The confusing part is that the same symptom is going to happen if we have low pressure or if we have too high pressure. So we need to figure out that by reading the fuel pressure. I've done that on a separate video about the fuel pressure sensor. If you want to check it out, go ahead and find it in the playlist to adapt the strategy of diagnosing depending on what you're gonna find on the live data. We're gonna see the known good voltage values on the connector of the injectors, and we're gonna see how much ohms of resistance you need to read on the injectors. Again, these are going to be the known good values. Okay, so let's unplug the connector. Let's connect the voltmeter terminal to the ground. Now let's see, I'm going to turn on the ignition, holding it with the clip here on top. Let's start with the left pin. We've got 0.5 volts, the second pin 0.5 volts. Now I'm not going to plug it back, I will back probe the connector on the other injector. 0.5 volts again. See the second wire, 0.5 volts again. On most of the injectors we're gonna find 8 volts sometimes, but I think that was from a regular injector. Yeah. So let's turn this to ohm reading. We should find something in between 3 ohms and 13 ohms. Okay, 1.5 ohms. It's gonna be a little bit difficult to find a good connection in there, but if for example for some reason you've got one of these connectors, just plug it in and you have the wires out. A lot easier to do the test. So these are the values you need to read on a known good injector, around 1.5 ohms of resistance. However, this does not guarantee that the injector is not leaking or is not clogged. Press the safety on. Okay, so that's pretty much it about these injectors. I hope this information is going to be helpful. So yeah, as always, take care and have a nice day.